Hi everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. Today is all about how to actually shift your thinking to a new perspective. And my goal is to assist you in actually bridging the gap between strategy and mindset. So I'm just going to get straight into it now. The first concept that I want to go through is your internal locus of control. And one of the major things that you probably deal with on a regular basis in business with your clients is this issue of the internal locus of control. And whether or not you are actually creating what you want or you're playing victim in everything that you do. So I want you to think about for a moment in your current situation in business and ask yourself, which side of the seesaw are you standing on? Are you in control of your results that you're creating, or are you at actually effect of everything that's happening around you? Now, there are two sides to the coin, right? One side of the coin is where you're saying, yes, all the results that happen to me in my life, and I'm responsible for everything that I create. Now, on the flip side of the coin, you might be saying, yes, everything happens to me, and someone else did it to me. You may have heard your clients or your prospects or people that you interact with saying either one or the other, which is a clear indication as to where they're standing. Now, if you're someone that is actually saying everything happens to me, this actually translates to excuses. So we're always finding reasons as to why it's not happening and we're not getting results. And I think this particular idea is extremely useful when you're talking to prospects, clients, or even with colleagues, because if you listen carefully to their language, you're actually able to pinpoint whether or not they're taking responsibility for their actions or not. So the other thing I want to mention is about personal power. So by giving your personal power away and becoming dependent on someone else, it actually robs you, ultimately robs you of your freedom. And nowadays, way too many people are actually playing this codependency game, whether it be with staff, with management, or even yourself looking for collaborative relationships. It can do this. However, be mindful about what results you're wanting to create and being responsible for everything that you're creating. So when you actually do this, you're actually letting someone else decide for you. You actually lose your own personal choice and your own personal determination in creating the results that you want. And sometimes this can actually be convenient and comfortable, but you're actually losing your way of being totally empowered in creating your own results. So what happens is you actually become totally dependent on other people and organizations around you who are not actually there to empower you. There could be some people that are there to lift you up and empower you, and they're the people that you want to look for to be able to support you with your own growth in your business and with your team. Now, I know you're wondering, you're probably thinking, well, this is all well and good, Maria, and if you're saying that everything is possible to make the ideal path, then why don't people actually just do it? And you see, the thing is that when you're a trainer in NLP, it doesn't mean that I never worry about these things. All of this means is just that as an NLP trainer, it means that I actually have the tools and techniques to it enables you to do exactly what you want and create the results that you want. So the key here is to actually listen to your own and other people's language. And the key phrase here is, I have no control over X, Y, Z, or that something is happening to me and I have no control over that. This is your cue to actually consciously see, hear, and feel the pattern and to switch the direction of your locus in terms of to be able to go out and create the results that you want. So it's about being consciously aware of where you're taking that direction. All right. So the next is the human perception model. Now, this is really important in being able to shift your thinking to a new perspective. You actually need to understand how we actually, perceive and communicate with each other. So this human perception model. And the reason being is because it allows you to actually determine how people, including you and me, to communicate and actually make decisions. Now, if I was to say to you, don't think of a pink elephant, what do you think of? The key phrase here is that I said don't. I said don't think of a pink elephant. See, you can't think about what you don't want to think about without having to think about that. Now think about that now, right? You see, in order to make sense of a negation, which these are being don't, couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't, can't, you have to think about it first and then negate it in your mind. So negate means you have to delete it. So why am I actually saying all of this? You see, we're actually designed to produce behaviors in a direction of our focus, of our thinking. So we go through life and we hire someone new and we say, I hope this person doesn't waste my time or cost me a ton of money. Or we get into a new relationship and we say, gee, I hope I don't get hurt again. So unconsciously, we actually, we say these negations, these words, which is actually putting our focus of what to actually create from that. So you see, the problem isn't in the context of what you're saying and what you're thinking about. The problem is actually focusing on the content that inhibits you to create new resolutions based on critical thinking. So as people, we are actually positive people, right? And we're actually taught to be positive, to have a positive outlook. However, the biggest mistake is that we actually only focus on one component of the 6 parts that create our thinking. And our thinking is made up of, I'll just bring this up, is made up of pictures, sounds, feelings, smells, tastes, and even self-talk. And the self-talk part is what we're actually taught on to think positively, do affirmations, and have a positive outlook. But what happens is we're actually missing the other 5 components of the package that actually create our focus. So as you can see here, we've got an event, which is currently the global pandemic, or something that's happened in the past, the 9/11 attacks, right? And then we take that in through sight, sounds, touch, taste, smells, and our internal talk. And all this information comes in from our external world at a really quick rate of, every second, 11 million bits per second of information. We're actually only capable of dealing with 128 bits of information every second. That's every second. That's a lot of information to have to come in. And we only actually take 128 bits out of that 11 million every second. So then it passes actually through our filters from the outside. And these filters are our values, beliefs, time, space, energy, metaprograms, which is language, as well as attitudes. We actually delete, distort, and generalize this information to actually process and create what we call an internal picture in our mind. So a picture that we create in our mind is actually made up of those 6 things in the package of what we see, hear, feel, taste, smell, and what we actually say to ourselves. The thing is that this picture is actually closely linked to our internal state. And that internal state can actually be a positive positive or a negative emotional state. And this state is closely linked to actually our physiology, which is our body language. And all these things, the filters, the senses, the taste, smells, physiology, is what actually produces our behavior. And our behavior ultimately determines what we actually create in our future. So this means that our internal representation or internal picture is actually made up of the 11 million bits of information, which is always unique, completely different to any other person's interpretation, even if it's the same information. And it happens instantaneously, just like that, even quicker than that, right? And ultimately, it will actually influence what you're actually focusing on. So it's very, very critical that the picture that we hold in our mind is exactly what you want to create in our external world. All right, so the next concept is directional thinking. And I think this is really important to understand in any context of life, specifically in business as well, because the person with the most flexibility will control the system or situation. And this first starts with how you actually think. This is actually most beneficial, this directional thinking, and it's used a lot in sales, negotiations, and even in business development, where people they use it quite skillfully in various different areas of business. The thing is, right, most people actually have a default way of thinking, whether that be they're a big picture person or they're more of a detail person. And the thing is that any business leader would need to adopt all facets of direction in thinking, including lateral thinking, which is the most rarest to find amongst the general population, because it's partially why people are actually struggling to create what they want, because it's the most challenging way of thinking to be able to do so. So the key here in language is the questioning that we use to actually direct the conversation or direct the thinking that you're wanting to focus on. So the key is in the language that you're using to be able to direct the thinking. Now, we have a choice to either go in abstract, which is what we call chunking up, or to go into detail, which is chunking down. Now, remember, people have a preferred choice. So the idea is to be able to utilize all directions efficiently. So chunking up moves us towards more abstract thinking, and it's used amongst salespeople and negotiators because it enables you to come to a common goal without getting caught up in the detail. And there's much more detail in terms of when I do run these trainings in how to unpack that. So just a high level, it can actually help you move from overwhelm, procrastination, decision-making, and even create new opportunities and results. So for example, with the structure of overwhelm, it simply means that a person is actually processing information in a too big of a chunk size of information. And the key here, the key question to ask here is, what specifically do I need to do? Or whom specifically do I need to connect with? The what specifically part is the key phrase in questioning, and it prompts the mind to create smaller chunk size pieces of information to be able to comprehend and also to be able to create much more clarity and critical thinking. The other example of directional thinking is chunking up, which is abstract. And this is actually great for setting clear targets and goals by asking, what's the intention of me doing this? Or for what purpose are we doing this? So that's a really great tool, and that's commonly used. Both these chunking up and chunking down are both used in sales and negotiation as well. The other way that I want to be able to cover is with lateral directional thinking. Now, what this does, it actually gives a wider scope of thinking that actually shifts your perspective in being able to create the same outcome just in a different way. So the process in which we do this is, number one, we ask, for what purpose am I doing this? Number two is, what is an example of this? And number three is, what is another example of that, or another example of this? So what I'm going to ask you to do over the next week is to choose one and practice one for a day using the questioning, and then choose another on another day using the questioning to be able to get a feel of what it's like to move in different directions consciously, and to keep practicing this exercise until it starts to become more unconscious. If you feel comfortable in a specific direction of thinking, then practice one that you struggle the most with in order to flex that muscle and to be able to use that much more effectively when you're having conversations with people. All right. Psychological perspectives. This is based on values in terms of how people actually use values within their thinking. This is much more of a complex concept. However, I'm just going to explain this in a real high level for you to be able to get an idea and the importance of this in everyday life, because there has been a major shift with the current economic circumstances. So I think this is an important thing to go over. So psychological perspectives is all about our values. And as we grow and experience new things and our thinking, our values and our thinking can shift and they can change, and they can change the direction as to what drives us and what we actually create. And this is really useful when we're actually dealing with different types of thinking, whether that be in business or in personal life. Aside from personal relationships, the underlying of how people think in terms of their values is super important because, especially if you're in a small company or in a small business, whether you're working with a team or even if you're communicating at home, it's really important to understand this concept in how people think with the people that are around you. Firstly, I want to clarify that values are not what we like or dislike. They are actually what is important to us. Now, this is important because you can absolutely detest a certain activity, but you still do it because it's important to you, right? Some people don't like doing their taxes, but they do it, they get it done and they do it because it's important to them, because they know that it's important to their business growth, because it's part of their values. Secondly, is that what we perceive to be important to us at the surface level is not important to us at a much more deeper level, at the unconscious mind or the unconscious level. What this means is that the values that we operate at the unconscious level is not what we're actually operating off at a conscious level. So this might be something you have to think about. So I highly recommend going back and listening to this training or this live to be able to really get a clear understanding of what this is about. So our values are super important because it's what actually drives our motivation and how we actually make decisions. And everything that we do or not do, or spending energy or time on things that we do or not, is determined by our values. And as I mentioned to you, values actually operate completely unconsciously, and we may not consciously be aware as to why this is happening. However, all our behaviors, all our motivations are based on our values. And another reason why this is so important is because we have to understand that there's different ways of thinking, and there's different ways in going out and achieving our goals. And this is based on our values. But the problem is that we have difficulties in achieving our goals because our goals are not in alignment with our values. And we go out and we do this in accordance to our values, but we're actually not in alignment with what we set consciously, right? So we set goals consciously, but our behavior on the internal is not in alignment with the actions that we're actually producing. So to give you an example of that is, if you set a goal and you're going out and taking action, but you keep beating yourself up inside your head, there's incongruency and misalignment between the values within yourself and the goal that you've set. So it's really critical to be aligned between the two in order to create congruency, to create the result in the goal that you're wanting to achieve, right? So the only way to determine a person's thinking is to actually go up to them and talk to them and ask. Is to have a conversation with them, right? And just simply ask, why is this important to you? Why was that important to you? Why are you doing what you just said? So actually have a conversation. So I want you to do this quickly if you're listening to this, and I want you to be able to write down 5 words that represent communication. 5 words, and I want you to do it now. How else would you describe communication? Now, communication is not a complicated word. It's something that is being used for a long time and people do it all the time. Now, if you're doing this exercise, I'd love for you to leave some comments below and I can have a look at those. Now, this is extremely important because what something means to a person may not mean exactly the same thing to someone else. So if I ask you what does communication mean to you, it would be a totally different word potentially to what I would actually perceive of what communication is. So what happens is you get two people that argue about the same thing, but they actually have two different meanings of the same thing. So it's really important to understand what drives and motivates that person by understanding what their values are. Now, aside from your personal relationships in business, if you're managing teams, it's important to really understand different perspectives of thinking and how people are actually using to describe what's important to them. This will actually save you a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of time of the other person and a lot of energy of the other person that you're interacting with, so that you can go and get the goals and the objectives, and so it can get it done and not having any difficulties in achieving it, right? This is also, even if you're having an intellectual conversation with someone, and you're not struggling to have this conversation with them, it's really important to understand what motivates and drives them, to get a clear understanding as to what their values are. So this actually just means that it makes it easier to interact with a person in achieving a common goal by understanding how they think, not what they think. I'm going to repeat that. It's easier to achieve a common goal by understanding how they think, not what they think. So, okay. So this is a great little metaphor, right? Claire Graves was one of those people who discovered values, and to have a clear understanding what a value is in psychological perspectives, is to understand that it's actually made up of 3 components. And you see that the 3 components would have to be external conditions, the actual cup, which is the neurology, the nervous system, and then the fluid, which is actually the words, the language that we use to describe what the values are. What happens is that what most people do, they actually only look at the words when people are actually describing what's important to them and forget about the other 2 components. So we have to understand that there are 3 components that are vitally component in relation to values. Like I said, the first is the nervous system, and this is part of the brain. The second is the environment, and then everything else that goes in the cup, which is the language, the words that we use, is all about the value that the person, as to the motivator as to why they're actually taking action on what they're doing. So values do not exist without these 3 components, and they should not be separated. Most people get caught up on the words and forget about the rest, right? So as you can see that this is a cup. So we have the cup and we have the neurology, which is the body, the nervous system. And then we have the environment. Now the environment is every single little minute detail, from the humidity to the temperature to the plants, to what species of plants, to the people, to to the structures, to everything in the environment around them. And then the values are the words themselves that are in the cup. Now, through the tests that we do in asking the questions, we actually establish the words and forget about the other components. What about the neurology? What about the environment? Because the reason why I'm saying this is because the environment changes. If I was to take the cup and put it into the fridge or into the freezer, the coffee in the cup would freeze, it would change. So the environment is the most important aspect of values than any other component themselves. In terms of the immediate input of someone's values, that is. So you cannot separate all three, and that is true in business, personal relationships, health, even personal development, or any other context of any other area of life. You cannot separate the three because our environment can change, especially right now that we're going through this particular, pandemic with, the economic changes. It's changed the environment tremendously, how we operate, how we work, how we communicate, how we do business, right? And obviously it's this input has actually changed our values and how we actually think. So this is really critical and really important. So there are various tools and techniques that we actually use that I teach in my trainings in terms of values and how to be able to uncover those on the unconscious level. And it's normally taught over 5 days. So I'm just like touching the tip of the iceberg here to give you, to open your scope of thinking as to how important this is. So there's no set type of value or type of thinking that is inherently better than anyone else. So the difference between psychological perspectives is just the different level of complexity in someone's thinking. That's it. It's not a person is that or this, or they're a certain way. It's just that their level of thinking is at a different complexity. That's all. Okay. So the next slide is, so if we get our values in check, in alignment, and we understand how to communicate, we understand how to be able to be flexible with our thinking, we also want to know how to actually obtain desired results to be able to create a new perspective, right? So how do we set goals? How many people here would have set goals and didn't get the result that they wanted? How many people here would have had, set goals, but they would have gotten some variation of that goal or something maybe totally different to what they actually had set out? A lot of people do. This happens to people. Now, anything that you want to achieve can be achieved if you have a clear path that you can see clearly before going out and achieving it. The key here is in the questioning. And the use of language that we use that it's stated in as well. Now, specifically the language that's stated, it's stated in a way to cause you to think critically and to turn off that negative self-talk, so that internal self-talk, to allow you to look at things from a critical way to create a desired result. So I'm going to give you an overview of how to be able to achieve something. And I'm happy to share the specific list of questions that I use to be able to go through to give you a feel and to get you to give a go as to starting to create something that you want. So let me know if you'd like that. So number one is you want to state it in a positive state. So stating something in a positive way is really critical because it motivates you to go out and get it. Number two is, where are you now? So the reality of your current situation. So our environment, our situation has currently changed over the last, say, 3 months. So you want to get clear on where are you now, not where were you 6 months ago or where you want to be in 12 months, but where are you now? Number three is, what are your outcomes? So what specifically do you want? What specifically do you want to achieve? What's the outcome? Number four is an evidence procedure. So what is your checklist in knowing how to be able to achieve the results that you want? Number five is congruently desirable. What this means is that your thinking must match your external behaviors. So let's say if you want something and you're taking action on it, as I said to you before, but you keep beating yourself up inside, you're more likely going to, it's more likely going to be more challenging to go out and achieve what you want, or it will take longer to actually get what you want, or you may actually create something that you didn't want at all. So it's really important to be congruent with your desire, both internal and external. Number 6 is self-initiated and maintained. So you are the only person who needs to take action and maintain that flow of energy in getting results. Not relying, creating codependency on anyone else to be able to take action or maintain those results. So being clear on what that is. Number 7 is it needs to be appropriately contextualized. So to give you an example of what an inappropriately contextualized is when someone decides to be tough and more assertive in their interactions with others. Now, this might be appropriate for business, but it may cause friction or damage in personal relationships. So for example, if you've just had a newborn come into your life, and you've got a goal to be more assertive and tough in your relationships or interactions, can cause little tension and friction in other aspects. So you want to be appropriately contextualized. Number 8 is what resources do I need? So whether or not you need any other resource to actually support you in going out and getting your desired results. Who do I need to connect with, or what courses do I need to do, etc. Okay, and number 9 is safe for self, others, and the planet. So what are the consequences of obtaining your desired results? So these simple 9 steps in obtaining desired results are key in being able to, if you set goals, to get a clear path in knowing how to get there before you actually start taking action on getting the actual results. So it's really critical in being able to set those steps beforehand. And like I said, I'm more than happy to share that list of questions, specific questions that accesses the unconscious mind to be able to critically think about these, to get a clear perspective in knowing how the destination defines the journey. All right, we've come to the end of the talk. So if you're wanting to get connected, you've got 4 different platforms there. What we do is we offer one-on-one coaching and certification trainings. And I'd love to connect with anyone that's listening, either on Facebook, LinkedIn, or on my website. And I hope I trust that you have gotten a whole heap of information from this. And thank you so much for listening.